It was a quiet evening at the park, just another routine patrol for the officer. The air was calm, the streetlights flickered faintly, and the world seemed at peace. But as his eyes scanned the area, they landed on a figure that made him pause. Sitting on a bench, relaxed and minding his own business, was Big Shaq. His iconic presence was unmistakable, yet to the officer it wasn't enough to escape suspicion. Striding towards him, his voice sharp and commanding, the officer barked out, "You don't belong here. Get up and leave." But Big Shaq, calm and composed, didn't move. His refusal wasn't out of defiance, it was out of principle. And in that moment, the officer's frustration turned into something far darker. Without warning, the baton swung, a brutal strike aimed right at Big Shaq's face. The park, once peaceful, was now a stage for injustice. But what this officer didn't realize was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Big Shaq wasn't just any man. He was about to show the world what standing your ground truly means. So, buckle up. This story isn't just about a confrontation. It's about courage, justice, and a lesson this officer will never forget. Hit that like button, subscribe, and watch as this incredible story unfolds right before your eyes. Big Shaq isn't just a name. It's a force, a phenomenon, a comedic genius with a talent for turning the mundane into pure entertainment. His iconic phrases? They've echoed through households, bringing laughter and light to millions around the world. But Big Shaq is more than his humor. Beneath the jokes lies a man with a heart as big as his name. He's used his platform not just to entertain, but to give back, organizing charity events, supporting youth initiatives, and spreading a message of unity wherever he goes. To his fans, he's not just a star, he's family. To his community, he's a symbol of resilience, proof that you can rise above any challenge with determination and heart. On this particular evening, Big Shaq wasn't on a stage or in a recording booth. He was just a man enjoying a quiet moment in a city known for its complexities. A city where the air carries stories of struggle and triumph, justice and injustice. As he sat on that park bench, unwinding from the day, he had no idea that this peaceful evening was about to take a turn, one that would test not just his composure, but his very principles. Big Shaq, the man beloved by millions, was simply enjoying a quiet evening when the faint hum of footsteps broke the peace. Enter the patrol cop. His strides were heavy, his demeanor unyielding. Authority radiated from him, not the protective kind, but the kind that makes you wonder if justice is truly blind. With a sharp glance and a dismissive tone, the officer barked, "What are you doing here?" The question wasn't one of concern. It was an accusation in disguise. Shaq, ever composed, looked up calmly. "I'm sitting," he replied, his voice steady but firm. But for the cop, that wasn't enough. No explanation would ever be enough. The officer leaned in closer, his hand resting on the baton at his side, his words growing sharper, colder. "You don't belong here," he spat, his voice laced with the venom of prejudice. But Shaq didn't flinch. He didn't rise, he didn't argue. His stillness spoke louder than words. He wasn't leaving. Not because he wanted a confrontation, but because he had a right to be there. And that right was worth standing his ground for. But tension has a way of escalating, especially when fueled by ignorance and power. The officer's patience, or rather his tolerance, was wearing thin. And then it happened. With no warning, no provocation, he swung his baton, the cold metal cutting through the air before it struck Shaq's face. The sound was sharp, a cruel punctuation mark to the injustice of the moment. The world around them seemed to pause. For a brief second, there was silence. Then came the murmurs, gasps of disbelief from those who had witnessed the unthinkable. Phones were raised, cameras capturing every second of this brutal display. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were documenting, ensuring the truth would be seen by the world. And Shaq? He didn't rise in anger. He didn't retaliate with fury. Instead, he looked up at the officer, his face a mix of pain and determination. His voice, steady as ever, broke the growing tension. "Is this how you serve and protect?" The words hung in the air heavier than the baton that had just struck him. At that moment, the officer might have felt powerful, but what he didn't realize, what he couldn't yet see, was that he had just unleashed a wave he could never control. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their disapproval echoing across the park. And in every raised phone, every whispered protest, there was a message. Big Shaq wasn't alone. The air was electric, thick with tension and disbelief. The Baton strike should have silenced Big Shaq, but instead it ignited something much greater. Rising slowly, he steadied himself, brushing off the pain as if to say, "You can't break me." The officer loomed over him, his authority like a weapon, but Shaq stood his ground, not with anger, but with unwavering calm. "Officer," he began, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a sharp blade. "Under what law do you justify this?" His tone wasn't defiant. It was deliberate, measured, the kind of tone that demanded answers. The cop faltered for a moment, his posture stiffening, his confidence shaken by Shaq's composure. "Resisting arrest," the officer snapped, but his words lacked conviction, a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation slipping from his grasp. Shaq didn't back down. "Resisting arrest?" he repeated, his voice laced with quiet disbelief. "For sitting on a bench? For not moving because I have every right to be here?" "No, officer, you're not enforcing the law, you're abusing it." The words landed hard, and the crowd around them began to shift. Murmurs grew into voices, voices into a chorus of support. People began to step closer, their phones capturing every angle of the unfolding drama. And then, the tide began to turn. What had started as a single act of injustice was now a spectacle of accountability. The officer's confidence wavered as more witnesses gathered, their eyes burning with a mix of outrage and solidarity. The tension in the air was palpable, crackling like a storm on the verge of breaking. Just when it seemed the confrontation might spiral further, a voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on here?" It was firm, authoritative, but different. All heads turned to see a senior officer stepping onto the scene. His presence commanded respect, his gaze sharp and assessing. The crowd parted, their collective breath held as he approached. His uniform bore the weight of responsibility, and his tone demanded truth. The senior officer's eyes swept across the scene, taking in the shaken crowd, the furious murmurs, the phone cameras, and finally, Big Shaq. His gaze then landed on the patrol cop, whose earlier bravado had all but evaporated. "Explain yourself," the senior officer said, his words as cold as steel. And at that moment, the tables turned completely. The patrol cop stammered, his words tumbling out in a jumbled mess, but the senior officer wasn't buying it. "I saw the footage," someone in the crowd called out, holding their phone high. Others joined in, their voices rising in unity. The truth was out there, undeniable and irrefutable. Shaq, still calm but unwavering, spoke again. "I wasn't looking for trouble, but I won't stand for injustice. Not for me and not for anyone." His words resonated, carried by the weight of the moment. The senior officer nodded, his expression unreadable, but his next actions spoke volumes. What he said to the patrol cop and what he did next would ensure this night wasn't just a confrontation. It was a turning point. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And tonight, under the glow of streetlights and the watchful eyes of a growing crowd, that truth was about to unravel. As the senior officer stood amidst the chaos, a bystander stepped forward, phone in hand, the screen glowing with undeniable evidence. "You need to see this," they said, their voice steady but edged with urgency. The senior officer took the phone, his expression hardening as the footage played. Every second was damning, the officer's unnecessary aggression, the unwarranted strike, and Big Shaq's calm, unwavering resolve in the face of injustice. The murmurs from the crowd swelled as others held up their phones, replaying the same scene, amplifying the truth. There was no room for excuses now, no way to twist the narrative. Shaq stepped forward, his presence commanding but not intimidating. His voice was measured, yet it carried the weight of everyone watching. "Sir," he addressed the senior officer, his tone respectful but firm. "This isn't about me. This is about the principles we stand for: justice, fairness, and accountability. What happened tonight wasn't just an abuse of power. It was a betrayal of the trust people place in those who are meant to protect them." The senior officer met Shaq's gaze, the crowd silent now, hanging on every word. "You can't undo what's been done," Shaq continued, his voice steady, "but you can set an example. Show that this uniform represents more than authority. It represents integrity." His words struck a chord, not just with the officer, but with everyone present. The power of his conviction turned what could have been a moment of despair into one of hope. And then the moment came. The senior officer turned to the patrol cop, his expression a mix of disappointment and resolve. "Your actions tonight were unacceptable," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've tarnished the badge you wear, and there will be consequences." The patrol cop, who had once stood tall with misguided confidence, now looked small, his authority stripped away by his own actions. The crowd, which had been tense and uncertain, erupted, not in chaos but in applause. Justice had spoken, and its voice was loud and clear. Shaq, ever humble, didn't bask in the moment. Instead, he turned to the crowd, his words a call to action. "We have to hold each other accountable," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the night's events. "Not just officers, but all of us. Respect starts with how we treat one another." The ripple effect of Shaq's words was immediate, sparking conversations among the witnesses, among the community. This wasn't just a resolution to one incident. It was a turning point for everyone there. And as Shaq walked away from the scene, the echoes of his message lingered, a powerful reminder that even in the face of injustice, calm, courage, and conviction can change the course of a moment, and maybe even the world. But this isn't just a story about one night or one man. It's a reminder of the power we all have to stand up, speak out, and demand better. The question now is, will we rise to the challenge? Or let moments like these fade into silence? The choice is ours. The night may have ended, but its impact was only just beginning. By the time the sun rose, the footage of that confrontation had spread like wildfire across social media. Millions watched in disbelief as the injustice unfolded, but more importantly, they saw how courage and calm could defy hate. The world was talking now about racism, about power, about the need for change, and at the center of it all stood Big Shaq, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. He didn't let the moment define him, instead he redefined the moment. With the eyes of the world on him, Shaq chose to speak, not with anger, but with wisdom. His message was simple yet profound. We must be better than this. Racism divides us. Understanding unites us. Let this be a reminder that change starts with how we treat one another. His words resonated far beyond the park that night, igniting conversations in classrooms, boardrooms, and households. People began to share their own stories, their own struggles, and their own hopes for a world where justice wasn't a privilege but a guarantee. Shaq's platform grew, but he used it not for fame, but for unity. He met with community leaders, spoke at rallies, and brought people together, not to dwell on the pain, but to build something better. The lessons from that night weren't just about a confrontation with a cop. They were about what happens when we stand firm against injustice. It showed that even in the darkest moments there's light, if we choose to be it. Shaq reminded us all that bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's steady, calm, and unyielding in the face of wrong. And the message he left us with? It wasn't just about race or authority. It was about humanity. The truth, Shaq said, is that we're stronger together. Fear divides, but love and understanding build bridges. Even in the face of adversity, truth and justice will always prevail, if we have the courage to fight for them. In the end, justice was served, not just through the reprimanding of a single officer, but through a broader reminder to us all. Accountability matters. Whether you wear a uniform or live your life in the shadows, integrity is what defines us. The truth always finds its way to the surface. And when we stand up for what's right, even the most entrenched systems of power can be challenged. But the true victory didn't belong to just one person. It belonged to the entire community. Those who watched, those who stood by, and those who, like Shaq, dared to speak truth to power. Shaq's words continue to echo. Injustice doesn't end with one act. It ends when we all rise up against it. His courage wasn't just in resisting oppression, it was in inspiring others to do the same. Now, as we reflect on the events of that night, we ask ourselves, what will we do with this story? Will we let it fade into the background, or will we allow it to fuel our own efforts to build a better, more just world? The choice is ours. So let this be more than just a story you watched. Let it be a call to action, a reminder that no matter how big or small, each of us has the power to challenge injustice. Whether it's in the streets, in our workplaces, or in our homes, we can make a difference. Together, we can ensure that stories like this lead to real change. Stand up, speak out, and let's build a future where justice, respect, and equality are more than just ideals, but the way we live.